Great, thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us and Red Wheelbarrow for my poetry reading this evening. And thank you, of course, to Ed and to Jacques and Melissa for inviting me to read this evening. Melissa's correct in saying that I'm hoping to have a new collection coming out later this year. It will include selected poems from my previous 3 collections, and then an entirely new collection added to that. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is give you a foretaste of what's going to be appearing in that new collection, which I'm more than likely going to name Small Souls, thanks to the Red Wheelbarrow Press. So I'll start with a poem titled Anniversary. Sometimes the world brims with the memory of her. To trace the imprint of a body on a sheet, follow the footprints of ancient conversations about after love, or recall a thread of light caught in a strand of hair. To search for faint traces of perfume on a blouse that was folded away at the end of a season in a forgotten suitcase. Echoes of her tripping over the years until the song forgets its origin and she becomes a gathering of dust on a sun piano. Then a poem you might have heard before, it's titled The Thief, and it recalls an event from childhood. The Thief. There was the thuggery of his desk, its pine weight and rivers of wood grain running beneath last year's exam papers, roughed up textbooks and snapped rulers. In the corner of his office, a basket of canes awaited selection. Above it, a certificate, and then a single frosted window that looked out onto the quad, censoring the view, yet open far enough so I could see grazes of cloud over blue, and he could hear the conversations of teenage girls. 2 deflated rugby balls shared a shelf above his desk, stacked with more papers in manila folders, an empty photo frame, books about discipline and the minds of children. He'd accused me of stealing exercise books and sent me to his office to await a caning at the end of class. I waited for the coming fright of the bell, wondering, would I be allowed to choose a cane from the wicker basket, or what had happened to the stolen books? There was the shape of his deformed pinky, the way it defied the other fingers of his hand. How difficult it must be to catch a rugby ball or steady a ballpoint. I cannot remember if he caned me. I do remember the cherry blush of his cheeks and fine deltas of veins like the petrified rivers of Mars that spread towards the shave lines of his jaw. And how he put me in the A team when I tackled Neil Parker. Then turning to a more intimate subject, this particular poem is titled The Intricacy of a Body in the Dark. These are the days of the clouds and colors of his childhood, of the secrets of forgotten garages with unwilling doors and small paned windows, of the mysteries of broken glass, rust, and enigmas of dust. And of the sides of houses too, of shadows leopard crawling over mossed brick, cool green thoughts and concrete crumbling to nothingness at the edge of tired swimming pools spun with holiday light. The intricacy of a body in the dark, how it reminds him of a life lived a lifetime away, where memory tastes of salted skin after a day at the beach, part sunlight, part ocean, and at the tip of its tongue, the bitterness of its end. He stands flared against cobalt, looking out at the waves, the last scraps of surfers, imagining someone else watching him. He has been turning a perfectly good key in a lock over and over his whole life, but the door remains locked. He imagines she stands behind the door, brushing the years between them from her hair. Now everything is near silence and made of last light, except for the sound of that key turning helplessly and distant keening of gulls. And then a poem closer to home. It's a poem titled Poem for a Son Leaving Home. The room still carries his climate, its tidiness, a damp towel, and a single sock that will never be paired again. Some are saying this is good for him, the way people always say things, each to his own alphabet, each to his own God or unbelieving. Yet another book is opened in a language I'm trying to learn, with its grammar of vacancy, the fluency of a perfectly made bed. There is no stopping this. Now, in its silence, the room is paused till the return of his voice, followed by body and used bedding. Before breakfast, I ran my fingers over a scattering of grief, spilt sugar on a wooden table, catching the morning sun. And then a number of poems in the new collection are prose poems. And there's a sequence of prose poems. This particular poem, titled The Ward, is for my wife, Julie. Before dawn, when a blanket is woven from the blue chill and light of undiscovered stars, time's membrane thins and a doctor imagines the dream whispers of her patients. Branches scratch their pleas against the roof and brickwork of the hospital. All is quiet except for the click and hiss of respirators in a world where the lung has lost its power. In a corner bed, an old man curves to the shape of an invisible womb, made infant again, striking a pose for an artist who never arrives. His dream has returned breath to the body of his wife. He feels her warmth, the rise and fall of her body as he treads water in that cold black sea between sleep and death. He wakes to the first disintegrations of darkness, the sound of a television, the rising rattle of a breakfast trolley and smell of porridge. At the far end of the ward's sheen, a doctor yawns and swipes the screen, scanning for rumors of hope and far-off miracles, but nothing is offered. And then a poem written in response to the unrest and riots that took place in the country during last year, during July. It's titled Our Road to Baghdad. Parts of the coast are dissolving into smoke and the inaccuracies of history, smudged by the same thick finger out to sea, if the wind allows it. The view from a helicopter is best. The splays of burnt out cars, warehouses folded in on themselves, and malls hemorrhaging their contents like mortally wounded heroes on some mythic field. The people flow, colorful corpuscles moving with cellular intent to and from burning buildings. This is our road to Baghdad, our highway of death. Where's the heart that pumps this blood into these organs made of pellets and corrugated iron? How will they eat their plunder? The bread laced with the glass of broken shop fronts or maize meal that tastes of burnt rubber. From the helicopter, it is easy to see into the future, to predict which way the destruction will flow, pushing against the suburbs where militia wait in black parkas at makeshift checkpoints. Night warms its cold hands over the fires of burning buildings. Our TVs have offered similar scenes in high definition to us so many times, yet the expected explosions and lacework of tracer are absent from the sky. We are reaping a harvest of ash. The seedless sower giggles in prison as his laborers work the fields. We have fallen in love with the news channels again, transfixed as a jubilant looter reveals his secrets. He looks at the reporter with glee, high on the moment, gives an almost imperceptible sigh of delight and declares, "I've never felt so free." And then an entirely different poem titled "Beneath the Streetlight." A banished angel huddles beneath fizzling streetlight, his clipped wings tucked under a greatcoat, eyes shadowed by the brim of a fedora. The wind turns on him. A gust lifts the lapel of his coat. It flutters against his neck and reminds him of flight. And then a travel poem of sorts. It's titled Night Drive. Cape St. Francis, St. Francis Bay, Humansdorp, and Jeffreys Bay. Passing 3 hooked bays where sea mist seeks out birds' feathers, the tang of milkwood and washed windows. The horizon holds its distance, ceaselessly conscripting cloud and ocean to assault the unseen. A lighthouse casts a beam of obsolete safety across a formless violence of heaving and black sparks. Inland, wheat ripens to its own dark arrangement, pulsed by the stale glow of the lighthouse in a country that simply wraps bandages over the sepsis of who owns this land or who was here first. And then a poem titled Nerve Lines, and it was written for our little dog Sherby. What was her going but a full stop of emptiness? A ruffled blanket in her basket, templates of dust, shed hair missed by the brim, and no bark following the doorbell. Not unlike awaking to a room in which the furniture was stolen while you slept. Yet no loss is a perfect amputation, and a surgeon is no artist. The ghost of the limb lives on, unseen. It bears no weight and offers no use other than ferrying those invisible nerve lines of grief. Melissa, how much time do I have left?
20 minutes if you want it.
Okay. Then a poem to remind us that the wind will return after this heat. The wind is trying to break things. You are sleeping and the wind is trying to break things. A plastic bottle escapes a bin and tumbles its hollow song over brickwork. A loose roof tile rattles curses. Shadows are plucked from their roots. Summer is announcing its arrival. We are pebbles tossed into a pond, rippling across the illusion of the present, intersecting outwards. What does our closeness mean? The marriage of your weight and warmth to mine, within this brief immunity to time, as a bedside lamp blots out the sways of trees across plaster, reflections and paraphernalia of routine. Outside, the wind is trying to break things. But for now, nothing can dismantle us. Then back to the prose poems. I'm going to read Small Souls. I presume all of you have, or some of you have heard it or read it. And again, thanks to the Red Wheelbarrow for acknowledging this poem. It's really, really appreciated. Small Souls. Forgive me, I know today is the day of your funeral, but I cannot write for you, and I've forgotten how to offer a prayer for the dead. A soft wind has taken you impossibly far from here, so I write for the insignificance of an ant that is about to be burnt by a child with a magnifying glass. I write for the coming thirst of the rat and the inquisitive mouse with its back broken by a kitchen trap. I write for the flame-colored vixen, cornered by a dozen hounds, and for the top-heavy bear, the sheer weight of her hairiness swaying in anger, and the 4 cubs at her feet, burnt from their den by happy hunters. I write for the soaked lace wings of a dragonfly's drowning in a swimming pool, and the bee's last journey to a rose. I write for the Gothic madness of a fly trapped behind the stained glass solitude of a cathedral, and I write for a stray cat walking in ever-slowing circles with an arrow through its neck. I write for the teat-heavy bitch being stoned by a trap of boys on a highway. I write for the concrete and straw lives of the lamb, the sow, and the cow awaiting the abattoir's bolt, and the fence-line lope of a lion tamed for the trophy room. I want to be a taxidermist for the soul of the earthworm, the caged finch, and flailing octopus in a fisherman's bait bucket. I want to display their lives from birth to death, from the nest until it is swept up by this ceaseless hurricane. I want to place the smallest of souls, of spiders, squirrels, and swallows, in glass and mahogany cabinets, covered in children's fingerprints, in a museum of great sadness. I will use an antique typewriter to type the stories of their irrelevance on cardboard labels that tell of pain beyond our bodies. Later, I will step out into the inconsolable cold and offer a sigh instead of a prayer into that dark hall of night. I will walk towards a far-off door opening to a new day that is forever shifting out of reach and deeper into the murk. And then a poem titled, it's also a prose poem, it's titled On Sowing, Idleness and Wonder. It is best to remain silent and wonder how the sky always carries your intentions to another place. Observe ants, bees, and unnamed insects go about their business. Avoid explanations. Bathe in the silence of stone and cumulus. Run your fingers over the spine of a fish after dinner. Squander the hours. Sow idleness and flickerings of thought beyond product. Soon enough, you will realize that too many fingers have smudged the ink of the map. It is quite useless. Wander aimlessly. Artillery, gelignite, and nitroglycerine explode no hidden path or treasure. The destination will arrive in due course and within the detail. For example, the delicacy of the underside of a wrist in sunlight, or sadness of a leg in winter. These things are countless small doors of opportunity that arrive as words and unmade poems before sleep or behind a trolley in a shopping center. Compounded thoughts that constitute the physiology of what some might call the beginning of verse. I'm no poet, but someone who finds a use for discarded words. I'm no more than a hungry man rummaging through the refuse of experience. I shift through the scraps of love, my sleeping wife, the ever-increasing distance of my children from home, or sound of 1,000 trees at night resisting wind. What is it that turns rain, touch, and sand to words? We are here making false music, whether as believers or unbelievers, godless beings, wandering aimlessly, sometimes encountering reminders of our destination, like a decaying tangle of bone and feather in a gutter. But for now, we must embrace flight. I'm just looking at time. Are there any particular poems anybody might like me to read from previous collections? So I'm sticking to this new collection, and I'm not sure if anyone would prefer a poem from one of my earlier collections. No? Okay. And I'll continue. Then another prose poem. This is titled An Equation of Infinite Failures of Whitewater Intersecting Youth. Surfers Corner, Muizenberg, 1983. The bay seemed larger back then, when the ocean's breath was conjured from salt, kelp, and grease, ammonia. The car park became a hospice for rust buckets and the last of the hippie combis strung together with feathers, beads, and leather belts. Rare south swells would attract surfboards strapped to Volkswagens and ancient Mercs, careening in on the wings of Jefferson Airplane. Somehow, one car was always abandoned to the elements and eventually rattled apart by the clack of passing trains, towed away before the offshore glass was churned to chop by the first summer gale. The best days came deep within the roaring 40s, massive days, scribed to aluminium lines of surf beneath a sky that plucked and peeled detail from every surface, until there was only ocean stacked to the heavens, weighing godlike on the stretches of sand flats, surf-pressed to iced concrete underfoot. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, high winds would fissure the clouds, allowing fine blades of sunlight to glint fiberglass and distant windows as we paddled back out. Old surfers would gather at the high water mark, their hunched bodies coupled to the light, enamel flasks steaming with rumors of the coves and crannies that would light up for a few hours and then burn out with an ebbing tide. Whispers of half-myth, wetted to unforgetting by shards of polar cold and the promise of a day of all days. Every breath riding on impermanence and swell, always at its epicenter, the unproductiveness of riding waves, an equation of infinite failures of whitewater intersecting youth, endlessly washing over the logic of dry land. Yet our hearts surfed on. And then I'm going to read a poem from my collection For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect. And it's the title poem, For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect. Find a sky emptied of cloud and a home where voices have turned to powder. Delete laughter. There are the birds and their languages of feathers brushing fence lines of light. Like a boy running his finger along a suburban picket until he finds a gap, hoping to glimpse a secret garden. Some have buried boredom and consigned their passion for laziness to old suitcases with tin handles in attics. Eventually, touch will disappear, along with the catch of a splinter, longings for lost love, and everything that is pointless and perfect. Belief has become the glow of a screen resting in our hands, the stained glass window of a digital cathedral, lit by a dead sun. Is there time for one last poem, Melissa, or I'm happy to end right here?
Yeah, you can read. Poem? Yeah.
Okay.
May I ask that you read it very slowly?
Sure. I thought I was reading slowly, but clearly not. Okay, this poem is titled Firestorm. A breeze slips over suburbia, chooses a garden and fans the flames of greenery, whispering secrets in the dialects of youth. I call to my children, words splash just beyond their play, spilling on the edges of the garden, pooling near a tool shed. I walk over and for no reason shoulder the door open. The interior is a trap of oxides and must. Shelves skewed by mass and age carry clouded jars containing nails, bolts, nuts, and evaporated histories. A vase clutches a fan of petrified brushes, and below it, the innards of a power tool are arranged in 3 piles over an oil stain. In the far corner, a mower is bound to the dank with electrical cord. Its underbelly is caked with yellow wads of grass, and here too, its stone-chipped skin is fumed in oiled dust. I pry open a paint tin and poke at its rubbery dermis with a screwdriver. A half-light has crept over a summer long past. Everything is comatose, like a country that has crumbled under the weight of its history and heat. After a 3-day bombing raid on Dresden in 1945, some of the corpses were so brittle that flesh crumbled into clouds of ash. Huddles of children and whole families melted together in the firestorm. Outside, my children are laughing, ignoring my wife's call to lunch, relishing rebellion. Her words are becoming ash. Motes of her voice drift in the rules of light below the shed's roof. What is it that clots detail but spurs pain? I leave the shed and the rows of dead on the streets of Dresden. The door objects as I close it behind me. For a moment, it sounds like God clearing his throat. I'm going to end now, and I'm going to end on a poem titled The Fence. He came across the vast calm of a fence, a parabola drawn from a hiccup of a town, a part-time collector of animal hair, buckled feathers, the battle flags of shopping centers and litterings of dreams. The fence gave chase alongside our car, the both of us heading towards a black sky and sour breath of a country gone mad. The fence gave up near a shotgun sign that read, "This farmer shoots first." His land had struck a deal with the seasons. The crops were lush, rippled by sunlight, exempt from a sudden acceleration of darkness rushing to meet us head on. When I turned on the headlights, there became 2 beams of truth, intent on pushing aside whole landscapes of lies. And again, the fence gave chase. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. If you do have any questions, I gather now's the time for questions, or is there a break?
Yeah, no, questions first. So if you're up for that, that's brilliant. If anyone who is here would like to ask something, you're welcome to raise your hand or pop a question in the chat or unmute yourself. Jacques is the quickest finger, so he can start us off. You're still muted. Here we go.
That's interesting. I'm happy. I usually, I often ask first. So if somebody else wants to ask first, it's also fine. But okay, seeing as I'm here, I'll go. I'll just to say, Stephen, thank you so much. Sorry, I wasn't here to welcome you at the beginning, but I was tangling with a poem. But it was a lovely reading. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jacques.
So okay, I really love the paradoxes that I heard your poems tonight, and I love it that you write this beautifully crafted poem about not being a poet, about being a hungry man only. And I really heard the sincerity of that. I wonder if you wanted to say something about that paradox of writing well-crafted poems about wandering aimlessly.
It's quite a difficult question. You got me there, Jacques. I think poetry, for me at least, now, and I've referred to myself as not as a poet, and I prefer not to be referred to as a poet, but as someone who happens to write poems, primarily because I feel a little uncomfortable with the label poet. It brings a tremendous amount of baggage to the conversation, and it's not baggage that really is limited to me, to my lifetime. It extends for centuries beyond my lifetime, and of course will do into the future. So this notion of wandering aimlessly, for the most part, poems arrive, at least in my case, as fragments, as images or words or phrases, and then there are, of course, the happy accidents that do occur, but in most cases, poems are cobbled together, unless, of course, a poem relates to a particular experience, which then requires, I think, a little more effort. But in my experience, I would say that in most cases, I'm that hungry man rummaging through the experiences of my life, and more often than not making mistakes and having accidents and encountering the odd happy accident. I will add, but for the most part, I'm bumbling through these spaces, these experiences, and then cobbling together the poems or the end results of those experiences and reactions. In some cases they work, and in some cases they fail. And therein, I mean, I'm very, very lucky and privileged to have an excellent editor in the form of Calvin Soul, who has edited all my books. So in that regard, I have a sounding board, so someone can say to me, look, that particular poem is absolute crap, or that really works. So yes, there are paradoxes, and for the most cases, Jacques, I'm bumbling forward.
It's a lovely answer. I mean, do you want to say something about the image of the perfectly good key that won't unlock the door?
I think the key in itself. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking essentially how we as human beings are forever trying to reach the destination. We become so preoccupied with the destination, with the act of unlocking the door, and the act of the journey, or the act of what perhaps lies beyond the door or lies within the room you are in for that particular moment or experience is largely ignored. So in that case, I suppose the key is perhaps a metaphor for a destination of sorts that we as human beings are, very, very preoccupied with. We spend far too much time, I believe, making plans, and instead of simply enjoying the moment. And that, I presume, is part of the human condition, I guess.
Thank you very much.
So Barbara, you've put your hand up.
Okay. Good evening, Stephen. Thank you so much. My name is Barbara. I hear a tremendous compassion in all your poetry and all your writing. Do you find that writing down, whether it be about the ant or the looting or whatever, that gives you a sense of how to hold that, how to bear it?
I think writing certainly does help. Yeah, the other half of my life is I'm a researcher, postdoctoral researcher attached to the University of Pretoria, and most of my subject matter is around military histories, white masculinities, and presumably human conflict. So, I often approach my writing from that perspective, and from humankind's inherent need and to destroy things and to wage war on each other, which tends to ignore the detail and the very human aspect of interacting with each other and, of course, the natural world. And that's something I think that plays a large part in my writing, in that I believe that we have these romantic notions of a natural world where humankind is distanced and the natural world is largely untouched, which, in my opinion, is utterly false. I think every aspect of the natural world has been tainted and, to a certain degree, touched by humanity, and we, of course, are experiencing the effects of that with global warming and pandemics and what have you. But I do feel that at the center of my poetry is this need to look at the detail, and to see and respect and to wonder about the detail of the natural world and of course fellow humans. I think those interactions that we have, those micro interactions and details, the stuff we don't really talk about, and the way in which we act, non-verbal interaction is vitally important. So yes, for me, detail is vitally important in my writing. It's at the center of my writing, I think, at least.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for those questions. I'd like to ask one and then I'll move on to Ed. I know you also design book covers, so you do work in the design aspect as well, and I'm wondering, that's also a creative outlet. How do the two relate or compare for you as ways of expressing yourself, the visual versus the writing?
Yeah. Interesting question, because as a graphic designer, I've always I've seen my job as a job. I've not attempted to elevate it to high art or something that's entirely esoteric, in the sense that it's beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. I believe in good design. I believe in design that communicates effectively and aesthetically. But ultimately, my job, which I do enjoy, of course, is simply a job. I work with pixels and typography and visual detail and images, and that's where it ends. In terms of how it affects my poetry, I think I take great care in the manner in which my poems appear visually on the page, and how that interacts with the actual meaning of the poem, the form of the poem, etc. So certainly my experience as a graphic designer and as working with typography, etc., does play into that aspect of my poetry. But ultimately, and of course, it's great to have that skill, because it allows me to play a role in the design of my own books, and at least make sure that the typography is correct. But ultimately, it's simply a job for me. I don't see this intimate aesthetic or esoteric connection with design and poetry.
Cool, thank you. That's interesting. Ed, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Stephen, thank you for that moving and beautiful reading.
My pleasure.
Hey, as a privilege. I had a lot of things going on in my mind while you were reading, and I would say that one of those is definitely that your imagery for me is fantastic. You come up with very arresting, thought-provoking, suggestive imagery. Jacques singled out the image of the key in the lock, the key turning in the lock, but there are others that one could single out, and despite the open-endedness, they're always precise. At the other end of the, they sort of do both. And I was thinking about the title of your previous collection, For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect. And yeah, just that your poetry, it seems to celebrate the sublime, and it never shies away from the absurd and the transient. So you have the poems that address history, you have love poems. All of this bumbling on my part, Stephen, is just to, maybe this is the first question. At what stage did that title suggest itself as the title for that manuscript? And then I have another question about the prose poems. Maybe you've partly answered it by talking about detail, but I'm interested in the ways that, say, distinguish those from the other forms. In your mind, are they alternate vehicles for accessing memory, or do they allow more philosophical reflection? Do they allow you more in the way of satire? I don't know. I'll leave it there.
Okay, it's a good question, Ed. The reason why I'm drawn to prose poetry is because I think to a certain degree it straddles prose and poetry, for want of a better description, in the sense that it allows for a more narrative style of writing to some degree, and I've been drawn to the form of prose poems as well, particularly in terms of how they appear on the page, opposed to the traditional form of poems broken by stanzas and various line lengths. So in that respect, the prose poem has also allowed me to present what I'm writing about as an unbroken narrative, as not necessarily a thought, but certainly as a fragment of experience and or response. And it allows me to present it in a particularly unusual formal manner, whether on the page or in writing as itself. So, and prose poetry has really interested me. It's something that very few South African poets have really embraced. I can certainly say one of the best collections of poetry was, and it was a prose poetry collection almost entirely, I think, and it was Calvin's Soul's Land Dreaming. It was largely ignored by reviewers and the critics, but incredibly powerful collection of almost entirely prose poems. To get to your other question about the title of my book, For Everything That Is Pointless and Perfect, I think, for me at least, ultimately, it's really about relishing the moment and relishing that sense, that the transience of life, and the fact that we are here for such a brief amount of time. And not necessarily, and again, you know, this preoccupation with plans and the destination is something that I push back against personally and as a writer as well. So to look at the detail, which is seemingly pointless, is really to open new doors, unlock new doors, and really experience other aspects of life. It's not about, you know, I think we tend to associate pointlessness or pointless endeavors with laziness and unproductive behavior, which is, in my opinion, actually silly, really. When we begin to look at the so-called pointless aspects of life, I'm beginning to sound a little philosophical here, but and we really begin to connect, I think, with what it is to be truly human, and that's essentially where the title came from. I took two seemingly two words that are often, I suppose, antagonistic towards each other, and brought them together in the title, and it certainly worked for me in that title poem.
Hey, thank you. That really answers my question. Thank you. Questions.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if that's it, thank you so much, everybody, for sitting the duration of my reading, and thank you to Melissa, to Ed, and to Jacques for allowing me to read my poems. It's most appreciated.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's been a pleasure having you here with us.